Hi everyone. Hello. So welcome to our public program this evening. My name is Azra Dawood, and I'm the Andrew W. Mellon Curator of Academic Programs here at the Loeb. I'm also the Curator of Waterways, which is the exhibition around which our conversation today is centered. Tonight's event is generously co-sponsored by the Environmental Studies program at Vassar. So, Water Bodies features the work of multidisciplinary artist and educator Sa'dia Rehman, whose research-based practice across a range of media, materials, and scales focuses on the human and environmental costs of dam construction. So, anchoring the galleries is a large site-specific wall drawing, which you can see in the distance. And in the photo, you can also see other pieces. So you'll see closer to us is the sculpture, Burn It, Bury It, Drown It. And to the left is a rebar piece titled Entrance. So Sa'dia is here with us today. We're also joined, right there. We're also joined by Arpitha Kodiveri, Assistant Professor of Political Science. Arpitha is both a legal scholar who focuses on the role of law in redressing climate harms faced by indigenous communities in South Asia, and an environmental lawyer supporting Adivasi, i.e. tribal, and forest-dwelling communities in India. So these twin roles, scholar, lawyer, are really beautifully evident in all their complexity in Arpitha's new book, Governing Forests. So together, Sa'dia, Arpitha, and I have envisioned this gathering as a space for reflecting on water bodies from an interdisciplinary lens. Sa'dia's work, I feel Sa'dia's work is capacious, and it can really generate conversations that help us think about the scope, scale, and agents of anthropogenic change. And to think through this question that Sa'dia asks, that I love: what might we build from this wreckage? So the program outlines that we'll do short presentations. Sa'dia, Arpitha, and I for about 40 minutes all together. I'll talk a little bit more briefly about the exhibition, the people involved, and the process. And Sa'dia will expand on the wall drawing and their larger practice. And Arpitha will help us think about this project from the lens of the law. How might the law, for example, read a wall drawing? And then we'll have a conversation and then open it up for Q&A. So Water Bodies of the Loeb is the confluence of several streams of work and activity, and it's very hard to avoid water metaphors, right? So primarily, it flows from Sa'dia, who has been building an extensive and thoughtful practice around histories of empire and nation building, concealed within water bodies, as well as narratives of home, migration, and displacement. So here you see one such work titled Hemorrhage. I first met Sa'dia in 2022. This was at a public program for an exhibition that I had curated about religion, activism, and urban space in New York City. And that program was an evening of dance and music. It was, very similar to this one. It featured a celebrated DJ, producer, and educator for whom Sa'dia had once moonlighted as a studio manager. So when we met, Sa'dia was working towards a major solo show at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, where they first showed a new body of work related to rivers, family, and climate change and environmental disasters. So they've since And I should say, climate change, and then again, this term that I want to use, which is anthropogenic change, right? So they've since expanded on this work across multiple institutions. Sa'dia's practice springs from the history of the Indus River, which flows through Tibet, Kashmir, and Pakistan. In the 1960s and 70s, the construction of the Darbela Dam in Pakistan, which you see up there, displaced nearly 100,000 people, including Sa'dia's father's family from their lands. When the water level at Darbela falls, fragments of submerged villages re-emerge as an index of this devastation. In recent years, Sa'dia's focused on histories of foreign aid as imperialism, or displacement and climate change and environmental change has expanded to global sites, including the Hudson River. To illustrate erasure across generations and geographies, Sa'dia experiments with hard and soft materials, many of which deplete and cannot be conserved or replenished. I'm also drawn to their attention to architectural forms and details, from the shards of the Taj Mahal lamp, which you see on the bottom in the center, that belongs to their mother, or to the use of rebar in a sculpture and maquettes of mosque, with this range of materials, right? How do they, and how might we, use fragments and fragile substances to tell counter-narratives that stay with us, right? And that challenge official histories and narratives of modernization and heroic water management. So this semester, Water Bodies is one of a suite of exhibitions at the Loeb, so this is the second stream of work, that are looking critically at landscape, or rather land, and access to land. My colleagues and Vassar students are reevaluating Vassar's founding collection of 19th century Hudson River School art, which depicts idealized landscapes, usually devoid of humans, technological change, and inconvenient histories, such as the history of chattel slavery, or of indigenous people on this land. Right? So Vassar, for example, occupies the homelands of the Mansi Lenape people. In these works, water is a recurring feature. It's everywhere. Sa'dia's work defamiliarizes it as just a natural landscape and expands outwards into global histories of shifting waterways. In the wall drawing, for example, figures at Thay and leisure mingle with plumes of dangerous smoke, creating, as one visitor noted, an unsettling landscape that invites the viewer to see differently. The drawing sits in conversation with other works, also by Sa'dia. Exhibitions are significant undertakings, from conceptualization to development and installation, and then engagement and maintenance after installation. It takes a team to make all this happen. I want to thank Sa'dia for the huge amount of time, thought, teaching, and bodily labor that they've devoted to us. And thank you to all my colleagues on the museum's curatorial, collections, learning, and community engagement and maintenance teams for their support in planning and promoting the project. I want to thank Amanda for her help with the logistics around this public program. And I also want to thank Serena Cho, who wrote a beautiful essay in the Water Bodies brochure, which just arrived yesterday. And you can find that in the galleries. This exhibition is different from our typical projects. So in addition to featuring already completed works, the wall drawing was created on site in this tight space of 5 days. So a special shout out to Leaf and students Zola, Becca, and Max, who assisted Sa'dia in the drawing. My colleague Matt, who is right here, worked alongside Sa'dia to chart tree branches in what felt like the coldest day in February. And my own husband, who with the director of the preserve at Vassar, found a rock from underneath the ice cover for Sa'dia's sculpture, and it was really difficult to actually find a rock that day, or that week. And that's for Sa'dia's sculpture, Burn It, Bury It, Drown It. I'm also grateful to the Vassar community who engaged with the project, starting with individual conversations to group presentations in the lead-up to Sa'dia's arrival in February, and then the wall drawing week, when we hosted 3 groups of the Vassar community who came to see the work in progress. One faculty member described these increasing circles of engagement as, quote, a series of acclamations, like an environmental process, which I quite like. And this is all before the exhibition had even opened, and it's the kind of deep engagement that we at the Loeb are interested in doing. I think I'm actually going quite fast with my slides. I mention all this activity because, I'll just check something. I mention all this activity because the process of putting together the exhibition and how the project weathers over time, both in terms of physical materials, engagement, and as precedent, is as important as form and content. I'll leave you with an example. Hosting Sa'dia's practice here helped shift how I teach in the galleries and the sort of spatial experience of the gallery. So when I teach now in Water Bodies, I ask students and faculty to sit on the floor it's an unusual posture in most museums, including ours. But sitting on the floor or a chair completely changes the relationship of visitors to the art and each other. So when Vassar groups visited to see the work in progress, Sa'dia invited them to sit on the floor. Producing art on site had transformed the gallery from a consistently maintained clean, dry space, requiring formal behavior, into a studio space of wet, unpredictable work. And working on a wall is physically tiring, right? By the time the exhibition opened, my way of being and teaching in the space had changed as a result of the site act of, gathering together on the floor. My student Ashley recently noted how normally one desires to get close to an artwork that is always held back by the frame. With a wall drawing with elements extending into the space, strings that you want to pull towards you, and a kind of hearth to gather around, as one visitor put it, entices you to sit. Visitors also comment on the reclining and seated figures on the wall and the impact these have on their own pose. Matt talked about how when we got the rock from the preserve, holding the rock and washing it in the sink reminded him of when his children were young and he could give them a bath. And we begin to see differently then, first with our bodies, which is also incidentally the topic of a workshop that a sociology professor recently held in water bodies. And it is now my great pleasure to make space for Sa'dia.
All right. Well, these artist talks are strange, aren't they? I mean, yeah, I make the work and then I have to talk about it. But I would love for this to also be like a, hearth and conversation too. So hoping for a robust conversation, and we'll answer any questions that you might have after the panel and conversation with Arpitha and Azra. When I walked into the space, I hadn't seen it actually fully in Gallery 2 as well as Gallery 1. And so I walked in, and I hate to quote Steve Urkel from the 1990s sitcom Family Matters. I was like, did I do that? I was stunned, but yeah, it wasn't just me, it was so many other people, so it's my great pleasure to be here this evening. So thank you, Azra, for inviting me to share this work with you. I don't know why I'm getting emotional, maybe it was like Steve Urkel or something. Okay, so she's been an incredible collaborator and conversation partner for me, and it was like truly magical relationship between artist and curator. I hope it's repeated, for a long, long time. So thank you to, of course, the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center and Environmental Studies program at Vassar for supporting this talk, and a deep gratitude to administration and staff that organized my visits. And I look forward to being in conversation with Azra and Professor Arpitha Kodiveri, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Vassar College. And also to the many students and faculty here today. I am grateful, we're living through such an extraordinary and difficult time, and how we spend our time, where we choose to be and where, what we choose to do is so incredibly sacred. So thank you for being here. Okay. So this exhibition, Water Bodies, came together over a year of conversations with Azra and experimentations at my studio in Columbus, Ohio. We found strong connections between the Hudson River and the Indus River, two rivers I have been acquainted with since childhood, as a child of New York City and within the diaspora of the mountainous regions in northern Pakistan. Today I want to focus on an object in my wall drawing for this show, my first three-dimensional effort to build what I have been calling a mobile mosque or mobile mosque. So I'll begin with a thread of family history that grounds my current work, and then go into the wall drawing and maybe touch upon some older work. So for the past 20 years, my artistic practice has interacted with my family's histories of migration and loss in various ways. My central questions revolve around empire and displacement, debt and environmental degradation, and the relations of violence and intimacy, collective and individual, through which this all comes to a chaotic, ever-shifting life. In the last 4 years, I've been meditating on my family's displacement from Kharkot. Kharkot was a village in the northern mountainous area of Pakistan. You can see a map here of the part of the Indus River. It is where my father grew up. That village was drowned along with 180 other villages, whole life worlds, by the building of the largest hydroelectric dam on the Indus River, the Thurbala Dam. As Azra mentioned, the construction of the dam permanently displaced more than 100,000 people, including my grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. The displacement, which took place in the 1960s, serves as a conceptual and material point of origin and departure of my current body of work, as does a family trip that I had taken to the region in spring of 2022. And I've been to Pakistan a handful of times. This is you can kind of see in the foreground, I already put it, the foundation of the walls underwater, so you can kind of see it closer to, ahead of the boat here. 3 years ago, I traveled by boat along the Indus with family. I saw signs of life and death, encampments of people on the move, shifting up and down the banks of the Indus, mirroring the river's tide. Sufi shrines, some white, some colorful, dressed with flags on top to mark the location for the times of the year when the shrines are drowned. Cemeteries and graves right side, upside down. Most inspiring was a mosque on wheels. I did not make it out at the time. I only understood what I was looking at much later in staring at photos and post-edit, and during my post-edit while making the video that's currently in Gallery 2. In the images, the mosque moved along the horizon. It seemed like an artifact and simultaneously of the future, a religious and secular form of survival and adaptation. Made of painted and reflective rusted metal, it rose above the rocky banks of the Indus. It was somehow both familiar and strange. It looked like a cloud, a pagoda, a ship from outer space, an enclosure, a safe haven made of rusted corrugated aluminum, siding painted green. We set out in the late morning, trudging along the Indus, we as in my family, 10 of us, thick with silt for a handful of hours. But our motorboat got stuck. We never made it to my father's village, which is what I was searching for, and which is submerged underwater 9 months out of the year. The journey to find the village still continues. I've made several iterations of this mobile mosque to scale on the wall. So here are some examples. This was in Birmingham, and this was in conversation with the Mielpuri community, who had also been displaced by another dam on the Indus River called the Mangla Dam. And so when they were displaced, a lot of the community actually shifted to Birmingham in the UK, United Kingdom. And there I got to talk to a few artists that were from that community, and I developed this work. And you see the mobile mosque floating at the center, and then you have these stacks of books on the floor, and then kind of banana-like boats on your right. This was a show in Miami at the Frost Art Museum. You see the wall drawing of the mobile mosque made of chalk, and also you see these ropes that are kind of tied around these clay bricks. Also, this one, as well as the next wall drawing, it is activated by the viewer. So whenever the viewer walks back and forth, the mango trees, the leaves kind of shift and glitter, and you can kind of see it in this one. And here, this is more an abstracted mobile mosque that I made. I was thinking about the corners and the lines of that kind of square rectangle. Also included maquettes in this one, so these objects kind of puncturing the wall or coming out of the wall. And then there's also that rope that kind of, I guess, holds it down or lifts it up. In water bodies, the mobile mosque is represented in multiple ways, in the wall drawing, in sculpture, and in found materials. But before I talk about the current work, let me talk about process and a sort of root work. I embrace experience as research. Material often enters the process simultaneously through a combination of experience, experimentation, and intuition. I take things apart and then put them back together. In 2015, my mother gave me a broken object, a 12 by 12 by 12 inch replica of the Taj Mahal, which you can see in the exhibit. The replica is made of compressed marble, and it was built to function as a lamp. The Taj Mahal is a monumental symbol of love, the actual Taj Mahal. A mausoleum built by the 16th century Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan for his wife Mumtaz Mahal. The most well-known part of Mumtaz's tomb, the most well-known part is Mumtaz's tomb. It is this tomb that is replicated in many forms as a souvenir. When I was growing up, it was a familiar tchotchke in my home and that of many friends. It is an object that evokes nostalgic and prideful histories and presents points of connection and breaking for my parents to their homes and exiles. My mother said to me, she gave me this lamp and she said to me, you're an artist, can you fix this for me? So I thought that was a pretty extraordinary definition of an artist. And, specifically of objects. And so, art as labor. Artists as skilled laborer. It was this comment and this handoff from my mother that led to this current project on the Turbela Dam and also the mobile mosque. The dam and the Taj are both mausoleums of sorts. That the Taj lamp is broken adaptation, a token for survival in immigrant communities looking forward and backward, connects to the mobile mosque. Jose Esteban Muñez's book, Disidentification, Queers of Color and the Performance of Politics, is a guiding text for me. Disidentification is a strategy for artists of color to negotiate culture and identity in the mainstream art world, white, male, straight, heteronormative. Disidentification's method is to break apart an idea or object, of taking pieces and putting them together. through repurposing, collage. It is a practice of world making and subversion, a strategy to create an alternate reality that does not fit into mainstream systems. Much of my current work still consists of the partial ideas and objects I have broken apart and put back together. The strategy of disidentification manifests in my thinking of the object and line as fragment. Now to my process here. To plan my wall drawings, I use my studio to enact and implore material thinking through additive and subtractive experimental methods. However, my wall drawings are often site responsive, often creating tension between the institutional space, architecture, and the violence of the frame. In the months preceding my install, I drew a lot, and some of those drawings I transferred to the wall in my studio, and I'm just going to go through a few of those drawings. A lot of them, were on 18 by 24 inch newsprint paper or small sketchbook paper. At the time, I was traveling a lot, so I would take my little, sketchbook paper and just keep drawing. So, even the drawing became mobile, and we could kind of see some notes in this one. I was trying to figure out, what imagery I wanted. So, I was also, I'm going to come to this, but just here while we're looking, paused at this sketch. I was also looking at the Vassar Preserve and also wanted to include local forms of nature in the wall drawing. I also, went into digital drawing and was thinking about the wall drawing as a mirror of sorts, and so it would be kind of reflected in some way, and so used, Photoshop, and then also printed that out and drew on this printout. Also, this is just an image of a few printouts that I often look at, but this is like a wall of specific inspirations that I had for the wall drawing. And then this is some more newsprint taped up onto the wall, and I drew on the wall. This is probably a 6 foot by 12 foot drawing of what I was thinking of making. Here's a smaller sketch. Some objects remain the same. I mean, I'm going to go back. There, the dam was kind of included on the upper left, and then it kind of changes to that mobile mosque. And then I said, why don't I have a little fun with this and play a little game? And so I ended up, drawing the entire drawing and then cutting it up into small pieces, and then just like moving things around, shuffling them around, and then gluing them down to something I liked, and then drawing more on top of that drawing. And then I took that drawing and then I made this drawing with watercolor and ink. And this this type of thing that I do, many artists kind of do this, keep drawing, kind of figuring out the line and the mark, and how hard you want to press your pencil on a surface, or how you want an image to kind of look. When I arrived at the Loeb at Vassar in February, in cold February, the architecture, the people, the campus inspired much of what you see here in Gallery 1. The wall drawing was completed over 4 days with staff and student support. As I was drawing on the wall, Vassar student Zola Sullivan was on a scissor lift filling in outlines of geese at the highest point of the drawing, and I see you're at the highest point of the auditorium too. And another student, Max Brenman, and Becca, and also Becca Spence, a member of this team staff here at the Loeb, we're dipping burlap into wet terracotta slip. Leaf Quilt was cutting stencils. Lead gallery guard Matthew Woodard was burning maple ash. Student assistant Ashley McDermott curated the vitrine of the printed out river images that students brought in during my open studios in February. And yes, of course, Hillel the rock. Hillel Arnold, you know, picking up a rock from probably an iced over, I don't know, snow, and we were FaceTiming because I was doing, you know, I was in the gallery while Hillel and Azra were in the Vassar Preserve kind of picking out rocks, and I would be like, not that one, and then we'd go like pick up another one, like freezing. It was incredible. So there are many more people that helped with the wall drawing. Those were just a few. The vignettes for this wall drawing focus on the flora and fauna, as I said, you know, Poughkeepsie, and are inspired by the Vassar Preserve, the maple tree, the ferns, the geese, and the beaver within riverine ecosystems. There's a beaver hiding somewhere in there. I placed eucalyptus trees on the left. These structures here that don't have the leaves. And these drew from my recent trips to Pakistan and Nepal. These trees are often planted in flood zones because their absorbency, often planted close to rivers to control the water's flow in the context of development projects. They work almost too well drying up the river and the land. So as you can kind of see, like I'm taking from a lot of different places. And then amongst the plants and the animals, groups of figures in play, leisure, protest, on the same surface floating electrical lines, and of course I wanted the mobile mosque as an architectural element. And then there's the Hudson River. Let's go to that. Actually, let's pause here. Hudson River. So, you know, growing up in New York, I was familiar with the stories, the flow, the history of the Hudson River. I recently attended artist residency at Woodstock, so that this is my studio at Woodstock Birdcliff. And then also in Art Oh My, in Ghent, New York, and which strengthened, you know, being there in both of these residencies strengthened my relationship to the Hudson Valley as well as, you know, the river. You can kind of see Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage was made at Art Oh My, Hemorrhage in the back over there, and also some of the mono prints were kind of inspired by Art Oh My as well. And also, you know, the Ashokan Reservoir is a place I frequently visit when I visit family up here. And as I researched for water bodies, I saw connections between the Indus and the Hudson and, of course, the Ashokan Reservoir. And I hope we can go through, you know, with that during the talk. And I was also, on top of that, I was also looking at the Loeb's collection. So here's, you know, just 3 pieces that I was kind of focused on in the collection. And then, of course, these 2 James Smillie works, which are, interestingly, these are mimics of a famous Thomas Cole painting of the same title, Voyage of Life, Youth. And, you know, I'm just going to go to this. So this is the Thomas Cole painting, and so this is a 4-part work. The Voyage of Life, you know, allegorically documents the 4 stages of human life: childhood, youth, manhood, and old age. The Vassar collection included the youth work in the series by James Smillie. And it's also the title of my wall drawing. So maybe many of you maybe know Thomas Cole was a founder of the Hudson River School, a group of mostly men painting the Hudson River Valley in the mid-19th century. The works shift from small, almost Mughal manuscript painting size to large canvases. Often these men would spend hours hiking, sitting, observing, and sketching the Hudson River Valley, then returning to their nearby studios to develop the composition further. And as they hiked, they drew and redrew their way of life and their knowledge of nature. By and large, they ignored the indigenous peoples and histories of this land through their drawings, advancing the European project of settlement. Let's go here. So in the Cole and Smiley's work, a celestial structure kind of floats in the upper left corner. I wondered if it was a mosque, or possibly a church, or something else altogether. It reminded me of the estate of Frederick Church, another Hudson River School artist and student of Thomas Cole. The Olana State Historic Site, which is here, the entrance is here, reminded me of, what did it remind me of? Sorry. The Olana State Historic Site is a strange place in the Hudson Valley, imbued with the influence of Islamic art and architecture, drawing from churches' travels throughout the Middle East. So I was also kind of like thinking about this in the background while I was making sketches in my studio. Their, relationship to this type of architecture. There were many aha moments while I was making the drawing on site. I was inspired to place the mobile mosque floating in the upper left-hand corner of my wall drawing. I had originally conceived the drawing of the mobile mosque as you had seen it in previous forms, directly on the wall. But instead, it became clear that I needed to construct the mosque out of a material associated with moving. What you see on the wall now is drawn on a medium-sized cardboard box purchased from Lowe's. When I looked up through the portal of the box one day while installing, I saw these geese flying. Within that moment, I felt enclosed by the world of the drawing, and it gave me hope. Clipped inside the mobile mosque is a copy of a painting of the Colorado River. You can kind of see it, but if you go back into the galleries, which are open until 9 p.m., you'll be able to kind of see that flapping in that mobile mosque structure. This print was shared by a Vassar student during an open studio day in February when I was here leading workshops, and students were asked to bring in an image, photograph, drawing of a body of water. The Colorado River is one of the longest rivers in the country. However, it is drying up because of climate devastation, drought, and extractivist agribusiness. Placing this image inside the mobile mosque is an inquiry of what this space, this box, can hold or hold on to. There are a number of echoes of the Cole Smiley paintings, and in the wall drawing, I have featured two distinct unembodied plaster hands resting on cardboard shelves held up by arabesque-like brackets. These hands gesture to the angels and the youth's hands in the Cole Smiley works. They also recall photographs of LBJ's signing of the Hart-Sellers Act, central to my father's migration to the United States. Another reference point are architectural forms reminiscent of objects in my childhood home. So this is an Amazon ad for the Taj Mahal in form. You can buy it for $200. I crafted, these small scale sculptures from collected cardboard and paper and meticulously wrapped in white plastered gauze evoke a subtle yet potent presence. The four maquettes within the wall drawing embody instruction and direction. The cairn, the stack, the bound books, the collection, the gathering, I was thinking about that too. The boat with collected detritus, the mushrooming architectural forms. These are just two of the four maquettes that are directly on the wall drawing, and then there's several others in gallery 2. And then, many of the maquettes were inspired by imagery that I had seen of mosques, but also I've gone to mosques since I was a child, and so those dreams kind of come into me. So bodily memory was kind of part of making the shapes. And so this maquette was inspired by the dome of the Pakistan Pavilion at the World's Fair in 1964, the years my father arrived in the US. So this is the dome, and then this is the Pakistan Pavilion at the New York City World's Fair. 20 years later, I was born in Corona, so nearby to this, and I'm obsessed with the World's Fair. So, and it was shocking to kind of learn that there was a Pakistan Pavilion there. But within this pavilion at the fair, the Pakistani and US government celebrated the construction of many dams on the Indus River, the modernization and cementing of the world. I wonder if my mother or father saw it. Thank you. So for this event, I wanted to talk to others outside of visual art. I was just curious, how do others work with material, with stories? It's too dark. Okay, let's keep it on there. How do others work with material, with stories, with process? In January, Azra convened several faculty members, staff and students to engage the work in progress through the lens of their research. So thank you for attending. I see many familiar faces from that Zoom meeting in January of last year. One such faculty member was Professor Arpitha Kodiveri. Initially, I was intrigued by Arpitha's path to becoming an environmental lawyer. What does that look like? I don't know. We both, environment, is that an oxymoron? I don't know. We both, but clearly, no. We both share a similar inspiration in the enigmatic Arundhati Roy and her essay, The Greater Common Good. In it, Roy writes, "At times there's something so precise and mathematically chilling about nationalism. Build a dam to take away water away from 40 million people. Build a dam to pretend to bring water to 40 million people. Who are these gods that govern us? Is there no limit to their powers?" Arpitha's work with the social movement group Narmada Bachao Andolan, which engaged the local community impacted by the Sardar Sarovar Dam, piqued my curiosity. I read about the group for my own research, and now here we have an incredible voice reimagining law to work for the people, for biodiversity. Arpitha Kodiveri.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be collaborating with Azra and Sa'dia, particularly because working with the law can be both narrowing and compels you to pick a side, right? And many times there are different stories to a particular argument. There are different stories to the ideas of justice and injustice. And what's particularly enchanting about the wall drawing is, to me, it encompasses a lot of that complexity. So I would urge all of you to kind of experience it. So I was asked the question, what would the law say if it were to see the wall drawing? And I think that already privileges the law as a witness to all of this chaos and complexity. And I sat with that question. I sat with it. I was quite troubled by it, because what has the law done? Look at where we are. The ecological crisis is at our doorstep. Authoritarian environmentalism is on the rise, which means that we want to conquer and conquest and control the environment as opposed to work with it. And I think Sa'dia's work, as well as conversations with Azra, forced me to try to look at some of the stories that I have been a part of, where the radical possibilities that the law holds, and the law at times can be poetic. What are the poetics? What are the sort of artistic urges that the law has but can never fulfill? And so I want to begin with some of those stories and try and bring it back to the themes that we have been talking about. So this picture is actually from the Siriska Tiger Reserve in the northern Indian state of Rajasthan. I'm there. I know I'm slightly pixelated, but you can see me right in front. Behind me is a Gujjar, member of a nomadic tribe that lives on those lands. And behind me are two environmental lawyers. And we journeyed there with the idea that we're going to support the community to be able to reassert their rights over their land and resources. There was a new law that had been enacted in India called the Forest Rights Act, and it just came out when I graduated from law school. So I realized, okay, this is it, this is the holy grail, all the problems are going to be solved. And I trekked for about 2 hours and reached the peak of Lilunda, which is the village. And as we reached there, we noticed that the entire landscape has an invasive species similar to the eucalyptus called Prosopis juliflora, which is, they call it Ganda Beval, which is a mad thorn. That's the local term for it because it's overtaken everything. Interestingly, this is also a tiger reserve. Furthermore, this has become one of the most militarized protected areas. Why did that happen? Well, essentially, we had, the story goes differently, but either ways, what happened was a lot of the tigers were poached. And because of that, they said that the local community was involved in poaching those tigers and were criminalized. And they then said, this is an organized crime network, thus the presence of the border security force. And what does it mean to lawyer from these landscapes, right? The first lesson that I learned, honestly, was that the law categorizes. The law categorizes the rights and the rightless. It categorizes who it can include, what are the categories on the basis of which it can exclude, whose trauma and loss is visible, whose is disposable, who are protected, who are giving implicit permission for harm. What does belonging mean? The law really feels like it has an answer when it should actually be asking the questions. Then we have, when the law looks at landscapes, what does it do? It silos landscapes into protected areas and unprotected areas, as opposed to looking at landscapes as those which are lived in. And I think Sa'dia's wall drawing does precisely that. It shows us the messiness of landscapes. The law loves neat categories, and that never really functions. So that's the first reading of the wall drawing. What is the poetics and artistic sort of underpinning of the law, or urges rather? Here's an image of a protest movement against the Kanahar Dam in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. I've been leading the protest, and this is probably, I think, 2 months into this protest. And the day that I went there, there was a battalion of about 600 police forces on the other side of the dam. And their stance was very clear. It's a no. You can try and come in here, but it's a no. And so the law, in terms of its radicality, it's always been limited by the imperative to develop, right? It's never really thought past the no. But social movements have. Social movements have been subversive. Social movements have been clever legal thinkers. And what the Kanahar Dam, apart from this protest, also said, both in terms of the law, was that not only is this land ours, which they used the Forest Rights Act to actually declare, they also did something pretty amazing. They did a citizen-based scientific study of the ecological importance of that land. And if you actually went to the protest site, you could actually see a tiny sort of museum of the critical ecological aspects of that landscape. They put their bodies on the line. They said bodies before environmental harm. And so that's the sort of materiality and sort of subversive aspects and radicality of the law, but the law cannot absorb it, right? The law still remains bound by those categories. So what does that mean? That means that the law only sees evidenced stories, right? What is the story the law understands is what evidence can tell us. And so that becomes a huge barrier. And it also takes us into the chaotic terrain of having to witness loss and describe it, and at times even inscribe it. So sometimes the process, as I was looking at the wall drawing, I was reminded of how in the Kanahar Dam protest, we did an exercise of community mapping. And this was a similar experience in the Niyamgiri Hills in the eastern Indian state of Orissa, where they were also saying no to the opening up of a large mine. And in both of these stories, the law, in order for it to imbibe the no, required this tumultuous task of making their community lands legible. If you go into the archives, if you go into the traditional state bureaucratic apparatus to access geological data, it's completely erased, right? So how do we remind the law of something that the law thinks doesn't exist or is erased? And that's where we found refuge in wall drawings and in the art. And so many of us actually walked with the community members, we made sketches of the community land and transposed it onto geological data to make it legible, to make what is the softness of the softness of the art into hard legal evidence. And that entire process was interesting, and the reason I come back to Sa'dia's wall drawing and that particular intervention is this particular wall drawing was so material, pragmatic, but also came with this desire to tell the stories of loss and to try and visualize those stories of loss. And I think sometimes those kinds of exercises can kind of push us beyond the law and what the law expects of us. So eventually what happened with both of those cases is in the Kanahar Dam, the dam was built, but in the Niyamgiri case, this was much later than the Kanahar Dam, they actually stopped the mine. So having witnessed one case in which that powerful social movement and the powerful exercise of pushing the envelope of the law to understand that destruction is not inevitable failed, this time it succeeded. And one of the reasons it actually succeeded was because they were able to sort of not just push the envelope of the law to realize the no, but to push the envelope of the law to reprioritize biodiversity, to reprioritize lived landscapes. And so a lot of my work now, and this is probably a conversation we'll be having as well a little later, a lot of my work now is about looking at how can we prevent harm. Why does the law always arrive after destruction happens? Why do we always tend to react to the crisis after the crisis is already before us or is constructed for us? And so a bulk of my work now examines what is it that the law can do as a preemptive force. Is hope a preemptive, preventative force? And what does that mean? And I think the mobile mosque to me particularly appears as an interesting aspect of the wall drawing, because what it urges us to also think about is how do we understand terms like resilience, how do we understand terms like hope, and what do we understand about lives on displaced landscapes. And as I continue to lawyer for and with communities constantly engulfed with multiplicity of losses, all I can say is hope is in the action and hope is in the work and hope is in the envisioning of that kind of radicality, that it's okay to say no, the rest will follow.
in the lead up to today, we've had several conversations actually about the water drawing and about Sa'dia's work and Arpitha's work. And together, I think we found several points of discussion, several topics we'd like to bring up. But I think maybe we can begin with something that you talk about, Arpitha, in relation to Sa'dia's work, right? In this question of evidence, right? So one of the questions you've asked is like, how does Sa'dia, how do you think of evidence? And and I think the way I understand that question is, how do you think of evidence maybe when you're doing research, but also how do you think of evidence in terms of the work that you're creating and the evidence it might leave behind or not?
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking about this question because these questions were kind of passed around before. So I had time to kind of think about it, which is always helpful. So yeah, I think that art doesn't think about evidence, period. Art doesn't think, I'm going to say art doesn't think about evidence, period. But I also, for myself, like as an artist, I don't think about evidence in the way that the law does, because I think evidence is something, to me, how it's defined is that it's something where you have to prove something. And then you have to prove something to someone of authority, so a judge, a jury. And I'm not doing that as an artist, and so that's what I kind of think about evidence. But I want to dig deeper into that word. Surely there are other ways that the law thinks about evidence, and also we can't just say like art is on this side and law is on this side. I think like both of us, or all three of us, are kind of trying to think about how these compartments integrate.
I think that's such an interesting way to kind of understand it, only because you're freeing whatever it is that the process is away from having to prove something. Because I think the law, as much as I do enjoy being a lawyer, I think it is so annoying sometimes. Because there is so much of richness in terms of oral histories, artistic practices, and other ways in which both loss and the right to stay on these landscapes before harm happens can be conceptualized. And when you try to throw that to the law is sort of confused, right? It looks at it and says, well, has the state authorized this, right? What is the legitimate way in which one can tell a story of loss that the law is able to comprehend? And sometimes that disconnect can be bridged. There have been instances and cases, especially there was a historical case in India where Adivasi communities just carried these carved gravestones into the courtroom because at that point colonial British judges were saying, well, how do we know this is your land and how do we know it's sacred? They said, okay, we will show you. And so they walked with their gravestones all the way to Delhi. And so sometimes the materiality and the invisibility of that idea of both belonging and stewardship completely gets lost in the law. And I think I refuge in the arts, and I think in some ways what I'm also doing perhaps in that process is also imposing a certain demand on the arts, saying, hey, can you do this for me? You know, can you tell the law, can you convince it otherwise that this is important?
and taking from many different platforms, and materializing that in like a relational display of objects. And so that tends to create a narrative, but it also tends to ask more questions. I've come out of this show with more questions than anything else. So, yeah.
I think there's a sort of interesting parallel, or maybe an interesting way of thinking about evidence in the museum context. And I love what you were both saying that, evidence suggests that you have to prove something to someone that is in a position of power, right? But I was thinking from a slightly different angle in the museum context, the fact that the wall drawing will disappear, right? So there is no kind of evidence in the museum system or in the collection, something that can be collected. And not necessarily like what is the evidence that this happened in the museum, but I just, like something about the disappearance of the wall drawing, which is very intentional, is also this way of saying, I think, no, right, to a position of power, perhaps. Am I reading that correctly, or am I sort of...
Yeah, I mean, that makes me also think about the burn it, bury it, drown it piece, which is the dictionary that's bound to a rock and submerged in the vitrine directly in front of the wall drawing, and so in the gallery. It makes me think of that conservation. So every day it changes. It's not preserved. It's not something that can be purchased, commercialized, property. It's now none of that. So that, the language kind of disappears. Memory kind of disappears from that book. I think that's...
A segue to that question, and I think this goes back to a lot of our earlier conversations, was I was wondering how both of you think of the idea of hope, resilience, and resistance, especially when we're all sort of working and thinking from landscapes which probably are at a distance and far away, and we probably work with movements and people who have witnessed harm and extraction. So, which I think in some ways gets politically written out as legitimate, right? And what we're trying to do is counter that. So keeping that in mind, yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think of those three concepts.
We actually had a really interesting discussion about resilience, the term, right? There's a lot to say here. I think the term resilience is so interesting because it does get used a lot in these contexts, right? So we were wondering whether is the mobile loss an artifact of resilience, or is it like a sign of resilience, or is it something else? And then the problem with using the word resilient as well. So I wonder if you could say something about that, because I think that you reject, or you are uncomfortable with this idea that you're uncomfortable with the word resilience, right?
Yeah, and for a long time I was not. I was comfortable with the word resilience. It's, all over the place nowadays. Resilience. And then also, as an artist in the studio space making work, you're like, how am I going to change the world? And I need to, where's the hope coming from? We'll get to that, artists. But then and something that I think I mentioned in the talk, or maybe I didn't, was that this mobile mosque was made close to the reservoir of the Indus River. And so it just travels up and down the banks to serve the community. And it travels up and down the banks because during the drought season, it's closer to the water. And then when the monsoon season comes, it's above the valley. And so it's mobile, it has to be mobile. And so there's one can say, wow, those people are resilient. They're like making it work. But then why? Why does that need to happen? And then also, resilience makes me think about, this is also borrowed from, I think she's a journalist, Sarah Jaffe, Jaffe, in her most recent book, which I'm going to forget the title, which is why I spelled her last name in case you want to look that up. She says something about, when you use the word resilience, grief is tempered out. And so there's no way of, you just keep going. That resilience is just like keep going. No matter like what happens, you just keep going. And I'm sure like in the studio, you hear this as an artist, like, keep going, just keep making the work. The world's burning, but yeah, keep making the work and pumping it out. Something will come of it, which this is true. Yeah, you should keep doing that. But then also, build with the community. So when you mention, the gravestones, taking the gravestones, that image is just so shocking to me. And so it makes me kind of think about, in the 80s, when AIDS activists were taking coffins, actual coffins, but also like just built, painted black coffins and throwing them over the White House gates. And so they would, night before, week before, come together, have an art build with all these artists, non-artists. And so there's something about that brings hope, and also does not hamper down grief and anger.
So we have other questions. We could also open it up for Q&A.
Yeah.
Should we do that? Okay.
I want to hear from you. And also we have this.
Hello. Okay. I was thinking about a couple of things. Sa'dia, with your artistic practice, material is really important. And I guess I've been thinking about recently, and like using the language of co-creator. So thinking about material as creative as like every other body that's present in the artistic practice. And then this question of evidence. Is there a space or way that evidence can be co-creator, or is like I was writing that sort of evidence because in the state of the law has to be sort of presenting an argument. Does that aspect of evidence in having to almost be in it's a thing of surveillance in a way, make it not able to be co-creator because of the specific rules it has to apply by? So I don't know, this is something I'm thinking about, and I guess I just want to present it to you guys as a question. But
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about two things, which I hope can kind of respond to your question. One thing is, when I started to create the wall drawings, I was often thinking about them as a private performance, where I was just drawing on the wall, and it was just a private thing that was then documented. It was documented by a photo, and then I would show it like here, or it would go like as a photograph in a gallery space. So let's put a pin in that. And then the second thing I was kind of thinking about was, this project that I have been doing with my family's history of being displaced in the 60s. It's still, I think, a seedling, even though, there have been multiple shows. I feel like it's still a seedling of it's very scary actually for me to kind of dig deeper into the project because I'm scared of what I'll find. And so there was a point just last week where I met with an artist, and we were talking about my project and going back to the Indus River. I hadn't been back since 2022, and I would like to go back. And she said to me, you know, did you talk to the river? Like the river has to give you permission to work with it or to handle it, to swim in it, you know. And you know, when I had gone in 2022, I did kind of talk to it in my head. And I also talked to, you know, my family members, and I said, you know, this place is like it's actually a graveyard. It's a cemetery for our ancestors. Our ancestors are listening. And so in some ways, you know, the body of water and the ancestors, and even during the private performance, or even in my studio when I'm alone, all of those kind of become my co-creators. And unfortunately, you know, in the wall labeling system, or like the gallery system, or this like 1% art world system, you can't really, I don't know, give due credit, but there are other ways to do that.
Thanks. I have, I guess, maybe two questions. One is the title of the exhibit, Water Bodies, and what that means to you as out there or in here, or I don't know what. The other question has to do with the burn it, bury it, drown it, that really made an impression on me. And it's probably why I'm here, because I don't live in the area. I was here a few weeks ago and caught a glimpse. You could talk to students, and they were like, come back. And I guess it's as a lover of water, as a person drawn to living water as a huge, I don't know, replenishing source of inspiration, and I don't know, just, you know, feeling okay. How do you feel about seeing that exhibit? Because there was a picture of it, you know, probably did start out clear. And you know, what you do when you cut off oxygen and life and source of, you know, health to water when it's stagnant and, you know, gets gross. So I'm just wondering, I just wanted to hear your feelings about that.
Sure. I can talk a little bit about the title. I think we were thinking about like all the different bodies that are part of the story or the narrative that we're telling, the history that we're telling. So water bodies is in, you know, like geographic, physical water bodies. We're also thinking about institutions. So thinking about the Kerala Dam as this project that is sponsored by the World Bank, right? So as a sort of financial institution that we're thinking about. And I think that, so really like bodies is referring to physical bodies, human bodies, water bodies, financial institutional bodies that help shape how we see water, right? So it's not a natural landscape, it's something that is actively shaped. So that's what I was thinking of with the title.
I'm going to respond to the burn it, bury it, drown it work. So that, let me see. So this is the third iteration of this ongoing piece, and so what you see in the gallery is this one large 2,100-page book. The book is a dictionary, and published in the 70s. The edition was in the 70s. My dad purchased it, and he knew English, but he just wanted this big. It's kind of extravagant, like this big 2,100-page book. But he wanted it, and we used it throughout our, my siblings' educations, my education, and so, but then also learning of the language, learning of words, of English specifically. And so then, submerging this dictionary into the body of water at this time. And I choose the book based on the place. So, for example, the first iteration was a stack of my Urdu primers. So my mother bought Urdu primers so that we would learn how to speak and write Urdu. She brought them from Pakistan, and during the summertime, we would learn how to do that. And so I, as a good hoarder artist, moving multiple times, always keeping the stuff, I had, the stack of Urdu primers, and I decided to submerge them, and didn't know what was going to happen besides I'm destroying this thing that I have been carrying, and this thing that had taught many of my siblings Urdu. My mom really wanted us to learn Urdu, which we all know how to read and write. However, it is not the language of my family. My family, since there's many dialects in Pakistan, Urdu is one of the national languages, and the other one is English. Because it's colonized by the British in 1947, and so before 1947. And so I decided to just take it and submerge it, just in a vitrine, a pedestal, traditional object that you see in the gallery. And then, I thought it was really amazing how you kind of read the water as changing the object, or did you use suffocating? But I think that's a part of it. And in some ways, this kind of contradicts something that I was saying about resilience. So the object, the dictionary, is changing as it's both emerging and submerged. And so again, I assume the text is kind of disappearing, but also, the flaps are kind of lifting, the dictionary is kind of bubbling up, so those 2,100 pages are kind of really expanding, and so it's a completely different object. So, so I kind of think about, and then also the vitrine is changing. The color of the water has changed. The first day, you could kind of see through the water. You saw the entire thing, to the thread of the ropes that were binding this book to the rock. And then I think right now, I haven't seen it in months, but now you see the lines of the evaporation on the vitrine. And so even that's changing, and you kind of see the power of the water and how it can change things. It
So there's an impulse to perhaps add water to make sure it's always topped off. And then the proper maintenance and care for this object is very different, so it's actually to leave it alone, to let the twine unravel, to let the water change, to let the book do what it will. And I don't know what it's going to do from one week to the next, right? Or even over the weekend. So this is a really interesting kind of, I think the process has a lot of, you work with fragments, right? But there's also this like fragmentation that is allowed. And that there's really no way of controlling or predicting it. And also this idea that this dictionary is gonna, once it comes out at the end of the exhibition, like this reference book, I was speaking with someone about this recently, and they were commenting that this is a reference book that you would use regularly, but it's going to be sealed shut, right? And there's something very interesting about a dictionary being sealed shut in that way. And it's like it's a really fascinating object.
Yeah, and I also think about Tina Camp's work, listening to images. If you apply that, that's another book. Listening to Images by Tina Camp. She talks about photographs and how you kind of want to look at the photographs and see, like, you know, what is it actually telling you as an artist. And if you apply that to other materials, like what is the material actually saying to you? Like, listen to the material, listen to your hands. I wonder if that happens in law with documents. Yeah, because it's so instructional. Like, yeah, there's a way, there's like a structure at many times, but. Any other questions?
Thank you all so much for this. It's wonderful. My question, well, I know you were talking a bit about the points at which, at least with the law, the law becomes, or it loses its capacity to sort of hold these historic and really like trauma-stricken stories. And then I also, with the Subverge dictionary, I sort of, at least personally, interpreted that as kind of handling the ways in which language also has those barriers and limitations. I'm curious, Sa'dia, as an artist, if there have been moments when you felt that art as a medium has had or has posed impasses or limitations to telling this story, or if it maybe instead is just always a generative tack. I'm curious.
Always. Yeah, yes. Yeah. I just, your question has stunned me to silence. So yeah, I think I often, art making often stops me. If something is not, I need time to think about this question. So I'm going to pass this to you. While I think about this.
Yeah, I feel like I've given the law such a bad rap. Like every time I teach here and I talk about the law, I'm always like, oh, this is therapy. Let me vent. But I just wanted to also kind of speak about the art in law and speak about the poetics in law. As much as we want to think of the law as a rigid framework, a framework of rules, a framework of norms, it also is the everyday, right? And it's also very malleable, and we make the law. And I think especially in this political time,
striving for something that's okay. And so I think one way in which I think of the law is also that it has this expandable capacity. It is malleable, you know, it's a bit like a rubber band. You need to figure out how to make that shape possible. And so sometimes, and I know this is probably lawyers just feeling really nerdy and fooling ourselves, but when we develop legal strategies and we do something called case theory development, it's a very artistic process. So for instance, you know, the process that Sa'dia uses, sort of like rejigging that image, we do that with legal provisions all the time. We cut out an act and say, okay, let's look at this differently. Or what is this section saying to this section? What is the narrative on the ground? How do I look at evidence, but how do I create new evidence? Right? It's a very playful, generative space, and that's one of the reasons I love being a lawyer. So, as much as the law is not great, it's also everything.
I think I'm realizing that we're out of time, actually. Is that right, Amanda? Sort of. Is there another question? Take maybe one more person.
I guess this isn't a question, it's more of just something I want to, I guess, throw into the space. Is there like a question?
No, sorry, go ahead.
So, I've been working on like a series of poems that deal with like my relationship with water and like water bodies and water spaces. I'm from Toledo. And I titled this collection Tidal Encounters, and sort of backtracking and researching that term. It's actually in astrophysics a term for when two celestial bodies are in close encounter with each other, they change each other. And so in this work I had been exploring like how water has changed me, and realized that that was sort of already a term in existence. So yeah, I don't know, I feel like you sort of talked about water changing you and that relationship of talking, and I thought that might be something you're interested in.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sa'dia and Arpitha.
Thank you, Azra.
Our galleries at the Loeb are open till 9 p.m. tonight, and we have an informal reception. So I hope you'll stay. We also have a new brochure that just arrived yesterday, and that's available in the galleries as well. Thank you.